Oh,
Big one.
next, one of our spiciest topic for this evening.
Yeah.
So this is an area that has generated a significant amount of discussion within the industry. It's the question of whether a tenant can move into a property if the first month's rent has not been paid. This links directly to the concept of prohibited legislation. So as it stands, requesting rent prior to the execution of a tenancy agreement falls within the scope of a prohibited payment, which does carry penalties. Historically, the position was much more straightforward. So in most cases, the first month's rent, if it wasn't received, tenancy would simply not proceed and no keys would be released. So it was pretty much the case, no payment, no move-in. However, the legal landscape has evolved. So under the current framework, once the tenancy agreement has been signed and executed, the contract itself is considered valid. So this means, in principle, the tenant's right of occupation begins on the agreed start date, regardless of whether funds have been received or not at that point. So this has created a great tension between the contractual position and practical realities of rent collection and risk management. And what I've seen as well, some agents are actually willing to be case law and insist on the rent before the keys. And then there are agents who are taking a more conservative stance and handing over the keys on the tenancy start date, regardless of rent received or not. So this is an area where we're seeing significant variation in interpretation, and it highlights the importance of clear documentation, consistent processes, and staying closely aligned with legal guidance as it develops. So while we can't insist on rent before the key handover, there is a clause in our tenancy contracts that stipulates when the first month's rent should be paid. So that would be a date between the execution of the contract and the tenancy start date. We also request the security deposit to be paid after tenancy has been approved. At the same time, we prepare the tenancy contract documents. So what we actually do need to touch on as well is what happened when there is an initial rent overpayment. So in those cases, clear processes around refunding any overpaid or misapplied rent becomes essential. So speaking from experience, refunded back. Yeah, absolutely, Abigail. Well, hopefully our strenuous referencing process will filter out anyone uh,
Yeah,
that is at risk of acting that way.
100%. Yeah. Okay. My laptop went a little funny again, but I see that you're
Oh,
finished. I wanted to add
all
to
right.
this section. Well, I'm sure at some point the government's intentions will be clarified, most likely by case law. But to quote the words of one of the legal advisors I spoke to at NRLA, she said, basically, everyone's taking an opinion on something that is not clear at all. But anyway, I want to elaborate on what Christine has explained. Your letting agent, tenancy manager, should be considered part of your professional power team. So, as a landlord, you most likely have a trusted accountant, you'll have a solicitor, a mortgage broker. If you develop property, you'd probably have an architect that you work with, a planning consultant. So, your letting agent's role is similar to theirs in that they're a professional that does more than just finds tenants and arranges repairs for you. The letting agent's role is to understand the practical application of landlord and tenant law and to help you navigate it, and to help ensure decisions are made within the legal framework. And what Christine has described, the different approaches taken by agents right now, I'd like to share the premise behind each of these approaches. So for agents who are advising, I know for landlords, it sounds, I'm sure it sounds scary. Like, what, my agent is going to hand over the keys to my property? Like, how is that acting on my best interest? So I just feel it's important to explain a little bit more behind what's going on here. So the agents who are advising to hand keys to tenants, whether the first month's rent is paid or not, are typically safeguarding their landlord tenant against potential fines and court costs, number one. Number two, they're opting to avoid becoming case law. This is a really strong driver. And number three, they are typically depending on rent guarantee protection to pay the rent and repossession costs if needed, as opposed to agents who are adapting contracts on their own without a legal professional, a solicitor writing the contract, writing it into the contract for them. Agents who are adapting contracts to include a clause stating that rent must be paid in full prior to occupation, they risk invalidating the entire contract. Okay, it can't just be thrown in. It needs to have been written in by a lawyer. And
this is the version we use.
yes. And the agents who are choosing not to release keys until first month's rent is received, these are the vigilante agents, they are either doing so completely unawares of the change in legislation, or they're doing so knowing full well that there's a risk that there will be a legal challenge from the tenant and it might, I should say, become case law. And those agents are willing to invest the time, effort, and expense required in order to deal with such a court case. Okay. So our position is based on one principle. We do not want ourselves or our clients to become the test case. So to achieve that, as Christine said, we recommend rent guarantee protection on every tenancy. We collect every payment permitted by law before occupation. So that's the holding deposit and the security deposit. We require the balance of the first month's rent to be paid by the contractual due date. As Christine said, it's in our tenancy contract. And if the payment's not made, we rely on contractual remedies that are available to us. However, if the matter reaches the point where the only remaining option is to invite litigation, then we choose not to become the test case. And at that stage, in accordance with our interpretation of the legislation, we'll release possession to the tenant and allow the rent guarantee protection warranty to protect the landlord financially. Okay. I also want to add that my personal view is that if a tenant deliberately chooses to test the boundaries of the legislation around this before the tenancy has even begun, it tells me something about the level of risk that that tenant is going to pose to the landlord throughout the tenancy. So that it would be concerning if a tenant were to do that.